Hello, everyone. We're just waiting for a few more people to file in, and we're about to get started. There's already quite a few people signed in. Thanks so much for joining us.
Great.
Started in just a second. All right. Well, let's get rolling. If people join in, we're going to be on this webinar for a little bit, so sure to be very informative. Thank you guys for being here today at this very special MPS webinar. My name's Megan, and I'm in charge of field events and new partnerships here at Municipal Parking Services. I've had the pleasure of being at many of our New Jersey events in the past. You might have met me at the Police Security Expo in Atlantic City recently, or some of my colleagues. I'm sure many of you know Ken or Thais at the New Jersey Conference of Mayors, where we were a sponsor. But we're excited to be having this webinar. We're really excited about our success in New Jersey and them really leading the way. Hopefully for the rest of the US, even though we already have a great presence. But a little brief background on MPS in case you aren't familiar. We've been in business since 2013. We are a technology company, and we provide a variety of smart city internet connected parking solutions, as well as cloud-based compliance services and solutions as well. We hold over 40 patents to our technology platform, and we're deployed in streets and curbs, as well as lots and garages and campuses and marinas all across the US and Canada. Today, however, we'll be focusing on our premier technology, the SafetyStick, which has performed so well in New Jersey, like I mentioned, and it really is helping to make streets safer, and make the jobs of law enforcement easier as well. So we'll cover what the SafetyStick is and where it's installed. We'll talk about the technology, and then we'll talk about some results from Linden, New Jersey, and touch on a few other cities as examples. Just a reminder, this webinar is being recorded. And also, if you have any questions throughout, feel free to type those in the chat box and the Q&A box, and then we will get to those at the end. But without further ado, I'd like to pass it off to my colleague, Ken Wollens, who's going to be co-hosting the webinar, and he'll introduce the other people on the webinar as well.
Perfect. Thanks, Megan. Yeah, I appreciate the introduction, and we're really grateful to have representatives from the police department in Linden joining us today. Lieutenant Conk and Sergeant Oliveira and their whole staff, which has joined us, and they've really made this a great success. Why New Jersey? New Jersey is really unique because there's a lot of boroughs that maybe don't have a very high population, but very high population density. And we certainly find that that's a leading indicator for illegal parking behavior. And we can talk about some of that. We can talk about some of the factors in terms of the deterrent effect that we're looking to create. Historical leniency is one, population density and availability of alternate parking. Those are some of the factors that will come into play. Essentially, one of the things that I'm really proud of is to be part of a company where we've come up with a way for cities to improve public safety in a manner in which we take on the full burden of performance and the full economic risk. And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit more detail. As Megan said, the SafetyStick is a smart city solution. It connects to the internet. And what we're endeavoring to do is essentially allow police departments or enforcement entities like a parking authority to achieve 24/7 persistent enforcement of illegal parking. It's a productivity tool. Police can't be everywhere at once. What we hear typically is that by relying on patrol enforcement, it's effective probably about 5 or 7% of the time. And this is really providing a means for officers to serve as witnesses to violations that occur throughout the day. I'm going to talk later about exactly how that works and how it operates. Another important point that I want to make is that we have a unique license model. I mentioned earlier that we take on the full burden of economic risk. The way we can ensure that municipalities are cash flow positive from day one in working with us is that we have a unique model in which we have a license fee equal to 40% of the posted violation amount. I'll talk about that a little bit more later. We've also made a unique concession specific to the state of New Jersey because of the otherwise prohibitive fees from the New Jersey Administrative Office of the Courts. And that is for those instances where municipal partners enforcing a state statute rather than our 40% license fee, a 15%, I'm sorry, $15 fee applies. And the thinking behind that is that we just want to ensure that the economics work for our municipal partners. This is a zero cost way for municipalities to achieve persistent enforcement and ultimately to improve public safety. And so we're really excited to be able to talk about that in a little bit more detail. I'm going to get into some of the slides. So just kind of the agenda. We're going to talk about some of the locations we have. I can talk specifically about some of the other locations in New Jersey, and representatives from Linden are going to talk about their unique experience, which is really going to be the meat of the conversation here. And I'm going to introduce in a little while, I'm going to, Sergeant Oliveira and Lieutenant Conk, they're going to talk about their experience, both in working with us and some of the results that they've seen. So the way it works is we capture photographic evidence. In this image right here, you can see what we call a defined space. You think of a hydrant, it's very easy for us to align the camera to capture violation in progress. It goes up into the cloud and we capture the photographic evidence that the officers are able to look at later. You know, we're constantly hearing that, for example, if a crossing guard doesn't show up, the police are pulled away. If there's an emergency, the police are pulled away. So this is an asynchronous way for officers to still be able to achieve their tasks. We haven't heard of any instances where there's a headcount reduction. It's really about more efficient allocation of resources. And again, our municipal partner can talk about their experience with that today and some of the best practice that they've had in terms of people logging on and reviewing and enforcing violations. So the key thing here is this about modifying behavior. It's solar powered, so it's very easy to install. We cover all upfront costs. There are no hidden fees other than the installation costs that we have. That's the only fee that a municipality is expected to pay. And it's a means of being able to create a deterrent effect through persistent enforcement. You know, there's interesting statistics. I think you're all too familiar with that. We have partnered with the Vision Zero organization, which talks about protecting the interests of pedestrians and bicyclists. And so we're excited to be able to do that and build our partnerships with some of the municipal partners we have that are really taking that and putting together Vision Zero action plans. If a city doesn't have a Vision Zero action plan, everybody can relate to safe street initiatives, and we can talk about that in more details. Essentially, it comes down to what you see on the screen here. Crosswalks are probably the most common use case that we're enforcing. We're working with several municipalities where they're reporting to us that pedestrians have been hit because of a block line of sight. And so that's something that we're seeing as a very common use case. Bus stops, it's the same thing. If there's an extended yellow area, we can position the devices to kind of stagger them out to capture all the violations. We can, again, talk about that on a case-by-case basis if you have any questions following this. School zones are increasingly of interest. You know, we hear specific to school zones, we're hearing about, you know, moms and dads getting really irate when they're confronted about parking illegally. And so we have a means here of creating fairness in the way that we enforce illegal parking. And by the way, that's another really a benefit that we offer is this whole idea of unbiased enforcement. You know, we don't know anything about the driver. We just know that this vehicle came here at this time, left at this time. We timestamp the photos, and therefore there's a violation. It's sent out to the registered owner of the vehicle. And then some of the more obvious kind of use cases. In the interest of time, I'm just going to kind of skip ahead. These are some examples of the device out in the wild. I like to call this Starbucks syndrome. And time again, you see people that park. It's a crime of convenience. They might be able to walk just a block away to park legally. But, and I think really there's a kind of almost an innocent ignorance where people really need to be educated about the hazard. So in this case, the person hasn't parked in a crosswalk, but it's an extremely unsafe area to be parking. And that's the interest that we're trying to protect here. This is in a suburb of Boston. This right here is in the Boston metropolitan area. We can talk about some of the publicity that we got here. We got some terrific front page coverage in the Boston Globe when we went live, and that was followed by coverage with all the local network affiliates. In this case, this is the MBTA bus network, and we're really excited about the feedback that we got from within the community, people who live there reporting back, hey, this is really safe now. The other thing that we're really happy about is that the results. The MBTA shared in their most recent report that the spots that are being monitored in the Boston metro area are now among the safest. So again, really proud to be able to be part of that. And this is another example of bike lane. In New York City, they reported recently that they're capturing about 2% of the bike lane violations with patrol and directed enforcement. So it's a real challenge, and the technology fits well in addressing that concern there. And here's another example. And you can see the hazard with a bicyclist trying to pass by. Now, the fun part is I'm going to turn this over to Lieutenant Conk and Sergeant Oliveira. I'd like them to share kind of their experiences and kind of open this up to discussion. So, and before we get into that, if you could just introduce yourselves.
Good afternoon, everybody. Lieutenant Conk with the Linden Police Traffic Bureau. With me is Sergeant Monica Oliveira. We met Ken a few years back. Might have been at the Public Safety Expo, or might have been at the statewide traffic officers meeting. The safety sticks were presented in a way that we saw as a way that we could leverage to have full-time enforcement, and that we wouldn't have to worry about additional personnel, because I think we had a lot of problems with our downtown area with illegal parking, specifically blocking crosswalks, fire hydrants, extending out into the corner, extending into the corners. And we've had issues where pedestrians were getting struck, which we still deal with, but outside of the crosswalk. And I think that we noticed that the line of sight was an issue, as well as the fact that the crosswalks were blocked. So pedestrians are kind of crossing in the middle of the street. And we placed a lot of importance with enforcement details and education in the past with crosswalks and trying to keep pedestrians in the crosswalks rather than crossing blocked. So we felt it was important to keep those crosswalks clear for the pedestrian. Sergeant.
And quite frankly, the parking enforcement officers that we do have that work in the city, at no point in time do we ever have enough of them to tackle all the violations that do occur on these corners. As all you know, if you have somebody there at a certain location, if they're standing there, the violations are minimal. If they start walking away, then 5, 6 cars pull up, and we just couldn't keep up with the amount of violations. So this was a really good initiative for us to try out to see what the result would be with the safety sticks.
Can you talk about some of the locations that you chose initially, and maybe some of the initial results that you were seeing?
We initially started with about 20 or so sticks in the downtown area, because it was our most congested. We typically see a lot of violations with double parking, which the stick doesn't unfortunately accomplish yet. But also the people trying to even avoid the parking meter, well, they'll park at the spot right in front of it so that they don't have to pay the meter, even though, you know, they're still in violation. The curbs are yellow. We have big yellow X's painted on the sidewalk. There are no parking meters. So it's blatantly obvious that it's a no parking area, but people just disregard. Like Ken alluded to, the Starbucks effect. We don't have a Starbucks in the downtown area, but it's, you know, picking up the dry cleaning or a pizza or Chinese food or whatever. And even though we had a dedicated parking enforcement official for the downtown area, on Wood Avenue, the second they walk away, it's an issue. And we also had a lot of we get a lot of arguments. They get into arguments over it. And this kind of takes that human aspect out of it from, you know, a confrontational standpoint where, you know, hey, I'm just 5 minutes or I'm just a minute. The camera doesn't lie, you know, and we'll get calls in the office about it. And we could tell them, you know, you say you were there for, you know, less than a minute, and the timer says you were there for 18 minutes. And so it really is, it's about modifying behavior. And the results that we've seen so far is that there's not a lot of recidivist violators, that they kind of get the lesson after the first, you know, after their first summons in the mail. And from my perspective, it seems that the corners are clear, even though the violations, you know, state otherwise. We still have a considerable volume of violations, but particularly during the day, those corners are clear. Crosswalks are clear. Fire hydrants aren't blocked. The bus stop isn't blocked.
Excellent. So kind of a two-part question. What kind of publicity or awareness did you work to create within the community, both prior to and in the first weeks of following installation? And then how did the community react to it? What was the public feedback?
So I think lesson learned from that was that we could definitely do a better job, or anybody that can learn from us can definitely do a better job on public awareness. So what we did was we wound up putting Nixle alerts out, which is an alert system that if you are registered to this system, you will get a notification about any type of emergent situation or any type of event that's going on in the city. But it is a subscriber specific. So only if you are subscribed to the service will you get that alert. And then they did put out a advertisement on Facebook and social media. But if we were to do, and when other locations do come up, I think more public outreach is probably needed, and as well as maybe a little bit of signage. So the reaction from the public was negative in the sense that even though we took the initiative to put all the information out there, citizens were complaining that they didn't know. The parking spot just has something that's there and they have no idea what it is. And they would have liked to have seen some signage associated with the parking stick. So it was definitely negative for a little bit until people started getting accustomed to what it was and why it was there. And I will say that I did actually do we have community meetings in different areas of town every once in a while. And we did do some community meetings where we explained what the parking stick was, what it would be doing, what it was there for, the violations that it would be targeting. But again, it didn't seem to be enough.
Okay, thank you. And I'm curious to know, how has this impacted your regular on-street parking? We're talking about the community reaction to it. You have a lot of meters in the city. Have you been able to be a little bit more lenient with that? I know that there's a lot of scarcity of available parking within the main business district.
Correct. I wouldn't say that we've been lenient with it. There is a dire need for parking in our downtown area for additional parking. But I think what people have realized is everybody always wants to park on that main roadway on the corner, whether it's for a minute or two to run into the bank, to pick up the pizza, like the lieutenant said. I see people now using further away parking areas to park and then actually walk to their destination instead of using that quick on the corner illegal parking.
So it's leading to people making smarter decisions.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good to know. So we have several enforcement representatives from various municipalities. So I'm interested if you can share kind of your internal best practice in terms of how you allocate your resources to do the enforcement. For example, do you encourage them to log on daily? And then kind of broadly, what kind of advice might you offer to other police departments or enforcement entities that are considering a solution like this?
We found that it became labor intensive to have somebody inside, constantly checking the safety sticks initially. But we worked out a nice rotation where we have 5 now parking enforcement officers. So they kind of rotate through, and it typically takes about, in order to clear our 20 sticks, it typically takes about an hour and a half of work to clear out the queue, which includes issuing the ticket with e-ticket and addressing and stamping the envelope. So it's not a real heavy lift, and it kind of gives them a little break from being outside, so they kind of rotate through. We also have days that our enforcement is low because we don't have the alternate side of the street that day. Usually it's typically a Wednesday. So Wednesdays usually our catch-up day where we could have maybe more than one parking enforcement working on the sticks.
Okay, that's great.
Themselves. But also not having to worry about dedicating a parking enforcement officer throughout our Wood Avenue area. It frees them up to kind of cover more wider area of the city. And we've noticed that the telephone complaints of people in different neighborhoods have decreased because now the parking enforcement officers are available to respond to that area rather than focusing on the illegal parking in our downtown.
Okay, excellent. Well, that's great to hear. Now, in terms of the results, how quantifiable has any modification in behavior been? And would you say that it's varied according to either different locations or different use cases? For example, whether it's a bus stop or a crosswalk, that sort of thing.
I can only answer that question based on perception. I don't know if I've typically looked at the data. I just kind of offhand noticed that the violation count has decreased since the beginning of the program till now.
Okay.
But
Great.
like I said, my window looks out. The window of my office looks out onto the avenue, and I can see that the bus stop that was typically occupied by cars, people run into the CVS or whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
Cars just simply aren't there anymore. But we do I think to answer your question on leniency, being that we don't have enough adequate parking, we don't have any adequate loading zones, and we have a few tractor trailers that need to make deliveries. So in those cases, we kind of provide a little courtesy in that area so that they can, offload their wares, because we don't have an area dedicated for any loading zones, particularly for a tractor trailer.
Okay. Okay. That's really interesting. And now, Linden became, I think, our first municipal partner in New Jersey to configure for time-limited parking. So can you talk a little bit about that? I think it's in front of a bank and I believe a post office as well.
Yeah, Ken, you were really good. When we first started this program, we kind of had the thought that in front of our post office, we have no meters, but we have signage that's 20-minute parking only. And in order for us to enforce that, previously, our parking enforcement would either have to chalk the tires, at first manually with chalk, but now we use the digital chalking. And so they would have to really monitor the vehicle and make sure that it's just not a meter, somebody who's trying to evade the meter. So, or maybe even it would be a merchant parked there all day because there is no meter to feed, and they think out of sight, out of mind. So we were able to work with MPS and have a specific, for those sticks in particular, a specific time limit that would trigger an event for a violation. And we found that although they don't issue a lot of summonses, there are people that do take advantage of the 20-minute grace period that's posted, but we give them 30 in order to run any kind of errands. And they don't provide a lot of numbers, but they do keep the traffic rotating.
Okay. Now, because this is technology, issues can arise. Sometimes if a device needs to be replaced, if there's damage to it. Can you talk about when you've had to call for help and the level of responsiveness and what that experience has been like for you?
So I have to introduce somebody that's sitting next to me. This is Sharon from MPS. So she is my go-to for anything and everything that has to do with the parking safety sticks, which is not very often, I will say. She's great. She's reachable almost 24/7. And if not, she gets back to me very quickly. It's also been great when I've had an issue with the parking stick, like recently somebody hit one. I contacted Sharon and somebody was out within a couple hours taking a look at that parking stick. But what's better than that is that even without us having to reach out, there are times where I will drive around in the area and I do see technicians from the company out just taking a look at those sticks, just making sure that they're working properly, making sure that everything is the way that it's supposed to be. And that's really been that's been really helpful. And from a customer service standpoint, I think it's been amazing, because from the police and a lot of the times vendors that we deal with, we kind of deal with them once and then we tend to not see them, or they're hard to reach. And this has not been the case at all with MPS. So we're really happy. And Sharon is great. She's really wonderful.
That's really great to hear. And we view this as a partnership, and so it's really important to us to make sure that we optimize uptime for the devices, because again, this comes down to public safety. So I'm going to just kind of skip ahead. I should have shown this screen a little bit earlier, but it's kind of a reminder to me. Lieutenant Conk, you talked a little bit about loading zones, and I just want to point out that we can configure these devices to enforce, for example, a loading zone. We can take a repression list of license plates so that local business owners might have privileges that other parkers would not. And we're going to be able to come out with next month some more dynamic time day part enforcement capabilities. So for example, you might have a location that is high traffic and should be no parking from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. and then from 4 to 6 p.m. And then in between that, it might be free time limited parking. Now, in those instances where you have time limited parking, for example, in front of a bank or a post office, you can be a little bit more generous with the grace period because it's not an imminent safety hazard that parking a crosswalk, for example, is. Our typical grace period, by the way, is 90 seconds. So for those of you who have joined us today, if you have any questions, we're happy to talk to you about how we can address any of those specific questions that you might have. I want to quickly, before I turn this over to Q&A, talk very quickly about how the platform works. There are really 4 major steps. You can see here, I'll just leave this slide on for just a moment. So the first step is that we capture a violation, what I call, the defined area. You can see in this image here on the left, we capture violations, they go up into the cloud. Before anyone on a department looks at it, we have our own team of CSRs, customer service representatives, that review it to quality check it. The idea behind this is that, again, this is a productivity tool, and our expectation is that we want to have you looking at good violations. Our expectation is you'll probably approve about 95% of them that you see. But again, our model is predicated on this being a tool for officers to serve as witnesses to violations. They're the witnesses. They're the ones that would have showed up at an appeal. And so they need to have the discretion and the latitude to be able to review and approve and say whether it's a violation or not. So that's the second step. It goes up into the cloud. We'll quality check. Our team has the ability to edit a plate. They might say that's not a 3, that's a letter B. And then your officers will be able to do the same thing. That's the third step, is that each officer is going to get a unique login that corresponds with their badge number or some other identifier. They're going to log in, look at the photographic evidence, and determine whether it's a violation. In those instances where they approve a violation, the output is what you see here on the right, and it's the fourth step, which is printing out the evidence form. That's going to have all the essential details of the violation, including when it occurred, and most importantly, the timestamp photos that give you the full duration of the violation. This is really interesting to me. You're going to have an abundance of data that's available for you to inform decisions. So for example, over time, you're going to be able to measure the modification behavior in each of the spots that's located. And you'll be able to determine whether you can attribute that change in behavior to the placement of the safety sticks. Lieutenant Conk was talking about the total number of violations going down. The average stay, as you'll see here, for example, averages almost 9 minutes, which is quite high when you're considering that this is illegal parking. So this is the type of data that we want to be able to share with you to make sure that you have actionable information at your fingertips. I want to very quickly go over the installation, reminding you that we covered these costs. We cover the cost of the devices, replacement, maintenance, repair as needed, and connectivity. So we have a built-in wireless modem, connects to the internet. We'd cover that. We cover the installation. So typically it goes in with a few anchor bolts. If there are pavers that aren't stable, we ask that you have your DPW put in a cement slab or concrete slab, and we'll give you the specifications for that. And then there's a plate that goes over that, and the device secures right into plates. I'll stop short of saying that they're elegant, but aesthetically, we've gotten some compliments on that. And really just to kind of summarize, I want to emphasize our objective here is to make this really turnkey for the municipality. So we cover the upfront costs. We make it so that it's very easy to use, predictable. We offer solid support. We want our municipal partners to be able to achieve 24/7 persistent enforcement. And so we want to be able to support that by providing them with an effective service. And just very quickly, in the interest of time, I'm going to cover some of the media coverage that we've gotten. I mentioned that we got front page coverage on the Boston Globe, and that was followed by media coverage from all the local network affiliates. The big takeaway for that for me was that when they went on site and interviewed pedestrians or people in the community, invariably they were really happy about that. And we see the same thing with the feedback that they provide in social media. Now, they walked up to some of these illegal parkers as they were getting into the car, and they weren't quite as happy, but that's to be expected. This is some of the feedback from other municipal partners that we've gotten, and we're really grateful for that. And before I turn it over for Q&A, I again want to thank Lieutenant Conk and Sergeant Oliveira for helping out here. And Megan, I'll turn it over to you for Q&A.
All right, sounds good. Thanks so much, Ken. Yeah, we've already got a couple of good questions that we can get to. The first one, which I don't believe we covered, Daniel is asking, what if basically our safety sticks permitted on public property or private property, excuse me. If you have parking ordinances on, private property like shopping centers. So
Shopping
can
centers.
sticks be used there or only on public property?
So I've encountered that question quite a bit as it relates to strip malls, and my understanding is that it would require permission from the owner because it is private property.
Okay, yeah, that's what I've always thought as well. Okay.
Mhm.
Also, can you tell us what like a project timeline looks like from the initial contract agreement to a completed install, just kind of briefly?
Sure. So there's two major dependencies on that. One is getting the agreement signed, and it needs to go through, I guess it varies by municipality. In some cases, a mayor can sign it or a business administrator, and other times it needs to go to 2 readings, which can take a couple of months. The other component to that is our queue. We have an installation queue, and sometimes that can build up. But in a best case scenario, from the time the agreement is signed to the time we have sticks in the ground, can be about 6 weeks.
Okay, sounds good. And actually, Daniel did have another question, a little bit different. You want to know, how does the method of review and ticket issue differ from previous red light traffic camera programs that were apparently found invalid by New Jersey court? So can you
Yes,
that?
I appreciate that question. So first, those are moving violations, and so there's a distinction right there. The other piece, as I understand it, is that with that technology, it was not the officer that were serving as the witness to the violation. In our case, they are. And that's an important component to our model. We want them to be the ones that are serving as the witnesses. We have been asked by some municipalities if we can make it a fully automated solution. And I'm not aware of any municipal partners that we're doing that with at this point.
Okay, sounds good.
Private property might be a different situation. With our technology for off-street, we're able to do that without having it be vetted that way.
Okay. Let's see. And then the next question. So is the safety stick pretty much infinitely scalable? Can you add as many as you want? Or are there minimums to get started? What does that look like?
There's really no minimum. The caveat I have with that is that what you don't want to do is just push the problem a block away, right? So you need to have a certain amount of saturation to have an effective program. So we really look at this according to need. If we have small municipalities that tell us that, people are constantly parking in front of the Starbucks or they're parking in front of a hydrant, we're happy to just put 1 or 2 of the devices in. But for the most part, what we see is that a minimal installation is around 10 to 20. I always recommend starting conservatively because it's very easy for us to go back in and add more and helping municipalities scale up as they become accustomed to the process of logging in and reviewing the violations.
Okay. I had another question from Chief Dillon, I believe. Can you address any arrangements with the New Jersey AOC? I guess he's mentioning that the mayor and himself received a letter from AOC. So they are interested in the product, it looks like,
Great.
but the letter from the courts was confusing. So can you help with any of that, describing any
Yes,
of that?
and as I understand, it's kind of varied by county. I can talk about this separately because there's quite a lot of detail to it. The great thing about this is that now we've been battle tested by the state, and they're not saying that they haven't poked holes in what we're doing. They're not saying it's not allowable. What they've said is that there's certain practices that must be followed. So, for example, one of them is that absolutely a police officer or an authorized authority, could be parking authority, has to serve as the witness to the violation, and that the mailing needs to originate from the municipality, not from the police department, but from the municipality. So if a police officer reviews and approves a violation, they can walk it across the street and have it mailed from, for example, the courthouse. So that's an important component to it right there. The other piece is we are able to print and mail violations in all the other states where we operate. They took away that privilege from us, and we're looking to get registered to be able to offer that service again, because it's a valuable service to municipal partners. But that essentially covers the gist of it. And I can talk about some of the nuances around that. I will say that we have some municipalities that started with local ordinances and reverted to state statutes, and a minimal number of local ordinances. And we have some that are still operating under an umbrella local ordinance. And that does vary by county, which is really interesting. But Chief, happy to talk with you about that in more detail later on too. Any other questions?
Yes, we do have a few more questions. What percentage of the summons are paid to state, town, company, etc.? Can you speak to that?
So if I understand correctly, so we have the 40% fee that comes into play for for local ordinances in the case of New Jersey, and it's a fixed $15 fee. What I understand, and this is kind of the genesis of that whole kind of shift in the model, this isn't published by the AOC, but kind of from my own surveying of various municipalities, including Linden, it appears that for a standard $55 violation, that the state in total takes about $31. So there's a number of different fees. There's some $1 and $2 fees, and they go to good causes like spinal cord research and armor for police officers, the bulletproof vests, that sort of thing. But as I understand it, that's the total amount. And so otherwise, if we were to enforce or go forward with a 40% model in that case, it would be difficult for our municipal partners to be cash flow positive in the same way that they are in other states. And I hope that answers the question.
Okay. And then, well, we actually had kind of a similar question, which I think you addressed, but also asking what percentage of the fines does MPS get, and how does it work with the court's schedule of fines? I don't know if we clarify that, if that makes sense.
The court schedule, I'm not clear on what that question is.
Okay.
I do
can always follow up afterwards, but
sure, happy to follow up on that. And I do know, as I said, that there are definitely some nuances. I was in a meeting with Plainfield. North Plainfield is a municipal partner, and their court officer came to the meeting. And in fact, what they said was that they're using Linden's ordinances. I didn't bring this up earlier, but they're using Linden's ordinances as kind of a best practice template for other municipalities in Union County.
okay.
Hope that helps.
Great. And let's see, how easy is that Sentry platform to use for someone who has like minimal tech experience? Is that pretty, how's the training for that? Or I guess that's what they're
The training's great. We have the training probably takes about 35 or 40 minutes. I think like with anything, it just takes a little bit of experience. We haven't had any complaints where people have said this is really confusing. And after the training session, we leave behind, I think it's a 2-page reference guide. And of course, Sharon's always available. And if she's not, I am as well. We operate as a team to make sure that any questions are answered quickly. But pretty straightforward overall, I think.
It is, definitely. I know that. And also then just a question, how many New Jersey cities are currently using SafetySticks? I can't recall the exact number.
So right now, we have Little Falls, Guttenberg, North Plainfield, Linden, Garfield, Woodridge, Hasbrook Heights. I think within the next day or two, North Arlington. And we have the green light from Jersey City, which we're really excited about. And then probably as many that are under contractual review, which is the most time-consuming piece of that. And I think really kind of another opportunity for me to emphasize that we really want to make this turnkey for municipalities. So in terms of heavy lifting, getting the agreement signed is the most cumbersome piece. and hopefully Linden can speak to this. The rest of it, we want to take on ourselves for the most part. So that includes the installation. Really what we look for the municipalities to provide us with is a list of the locations, the violations to be enforced, and the associated fine amounts. We populate that into the system, and we configure the devices before we ship them, and then we do the training. So that's really important to us to make it as easy as possible for the municipalities to use.
Okay. All right, let's see if we have any more questions. So I think we talked a good bit about this, but are there any issues or repairs that won't be covered under the contract? Like, maybe say graffiti but is there any, but pretty much everything is covered, correct?
Yes, so we get asked that question a lot. When I talk about our model, people say, what about vandalism? And again, to emphasize, this is a partnership. We've been really fortunate that that has not been a concern. There have been instances where we have had vandalism in Guttenberg. Someone kind of turned around the glass globe. It was a little bit looser than it should be, so that the tinted part was in front of the camera. That was an easy fix. We had one instance where someone put a plastic bag over the device, but by and large, it's been few and far between. If we encounter a situation like that, and because this is a partnership, we might have a conversation and say, look, this is the second time this location has been vandalized. Let's give it a rest a while and see how it plays out. Maybe try again in a few months, that sort of thing. But again, knock on wood, the vandalism concern hasn't been something we've had to address.
Okay. And next question, this one, being a solar powered device, is there any, how much solar power does the device need to operate? Is that a concern in areas where it might not have enough direct sunlight, or?
So we're looking for about an hour of direct sunlight per day on average. There have been very rare instances where there's one I recall that was positioned near a bridge where we had to kind of revisit that, and that can become a little bit of a challenge. One of the workarounds that we can do if needed is, because we do have people in for maintenance and repair, the devices are intended to last for about 6 weeks without a charge once they're fully charged. And so that's something that we can address on occasion. If we see that a battery is running low, we can replace the battery or recharge it when we're doing normal maintenance.
Okay. Perfect. And then Sergeant Gregory made a note to you, Ken, but that he'd like to speak with you more. Yeah, if anyone has any other questions, I think we've covered a lot. I'll wait here a second, see if any other ones come in. But this is something that someone has asked before. This is clearly a labor saving tool. Has there been any pushback from enforcement personnel regarding the safety stick from the enforcement?
I think that's a good question. I'll try to answer that. So like with anything, it's always a learning curve. So I think in the beginning when the parking enforcement officers had to sit and review all the parking stick violations, it might have become cumbersome and just getting started. But once you get the hang of it, I mean, the program is very, very easy to use. It's very user friendly. And once they got the hang of it, it's really not, it's not a lot. It's not a heavy workload as far as, any challenges. And they quite honestly like to get out of the field for an hour or two a day and just do something different.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's probably pretty accurate. Less time on the streets, more time sitting in front of a computer with your Starbucks for a little bit. So
Right.
okay. Well, I don't see any more questions, but of course, if something comes up, feel free to follow up with Ken, and I'm sure he'd be happy to answer any of your questions. Anyone have any last comments or things they want to bubble up? And Ken, I'll just let you wrap it up.
Great, thank you so much. Yeah, so again, this is something that we look at as an important productivity tool for public safety, and we built a model that reflects that. We really want to make it easy to work with us. I want to express my gratitude to the folks in Linden for joining and also for our guests for joining today. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ken.
Thank you, Ken.